Welcome to the first installment of a new series called Hitch Plays, where I, your host, Hitch, play a wide variety of games based around anime series, and today we're going to have a look at the video game adaptation of the Tekkaman Blade series. For those who don't know, Tekkaman Blade is a 90s science fiction anime. The story takes place in a future where Earth has built a giant defense system around the planet to ward off alien attacks, but a group of bug-like aliens known as the Radam have taken over the defense system and turned it against humanity. During this time, a mysterious young man who's later named D-Boy, short for Dangerous Boy, crash lands on Earth from the stars above. In a shocking turn of events, D-Boy has amnesia, but is driven to return to space and fight against the Radam using a crystal that transforms him into the hero Tekkaman Blade. Together with a group of humans called the Space Knights, Tekkaman Blade journeys amongst the stars to fight against the Radam and their leaders, who are other Tekkaman. The action in the show comes in two flavors. One is space combat, which involves Tekkaman Blade taking down hordes of the Radam, and the other flavor is one-on-one battles between Tekkaman Blade and the other Tekkaman leaders. So when it comes to doing a video game adaptation, you can take this series in two different directions. You can either make it a side-scrolling shooter like R-Type, or you can make it a solid fighting game like Street Fighter. Well, the creators of the game thought, screw it, we'll do both. Tekkaman Blade's levels are divided between two different stages of gameplay. The first is a side-scrolling shooter, and the second stage is a one-on-one boss battle. Both stages come with different control schemes and gameplay tactics, and different problems to boot. The stage that takes up the bulk of the game is the side-scrolling levels. You maneuver Tekkaman Blade across the screen, taking out a variety of different Radam along the way. While you're constantly moving forward, you can control Tekkaman Blade using the D-pad, and the game gives you three methods of attack. The first is a simple slash that only hits directly what's in front of Tekkaman Blade. The second is a move where you hurl your staff halfway across the screen, and the last attack is Tekkaman Blade's signature move, the Volt Tekka, which is a limited screen clearing move. The moment you start up the game, you begin to notice the biggest problem with the side-scrolling levels. Your attacks are your greatest enemy in the game. You see, both the attacks in the game leave you at a great disadvantage. With the basic slashing attack, you have zero range, and in order to do damage with it, you have to get right into the enemy's face. If you aren't quick enough, or the game's response time decides to slow down a bit, which happens from time to time, you'll be hit and take damage. Now you're thinking, well, just use a second staff hurling move if you want to attack enemies from a distance. The problem with the second move deals with how long it takes for your staff to come back to you. The moment you throw your staff, you're left completely open to attack, and there's nothing you can do but dodge against enemy fire if the Radam decide to go after you throw your staff. Which might not be a problem if the staff came back to you automatically after reaching its peak distance, but it doesn't, and the staff stays at its peak for a good second or so before coming back to you. It's ultimately just an attack that makes you more of an open target. Honestly, the best way to play through the side-scrolling levels is just to dodge everything and not attack unless it's necessary to remove an obstacle that's in your path, which can make the game pretty dull if all you're doing is avoiding the baddies. But if you do attack anything, make sure it's these ice cream cone looking things. If you defeat all four of them, they'll give you one of three pickup items. The green item is a health boost, the red is a token to use your Volt Tekka attack, which appears once per level, and the best pickup item in the game is this blue one. With the blue item, you become temporarily invincible, and you can zoom across the screen and take out all of the enemies in your path without using any of your attacks. It doesn't last long, but it's a good item to use to rack up some points and to clear out your screen. Now, another issue with the side-scrolling levels is that you can only attack going forward. If you're just dodging everything, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when you get to the mini-boss at the end of the side-scrolling levels, you'll be left with a big problem. When the mini-bosses attack you, they move all the way across the screen in both directions and launch attacks at you while they're behind you, and it forces you to wait until they move to the other side of the screen for you to attack them. It's super annoying when you're just behind an enemy boss, and you can't turn around and hit them a few times before they reach their hiding spot. But with all that being said, this game is actually super easy. While the game does have three different difficulty settings and a fourth unlockable difficulty, the only difference between each of these settings is the amount of damage you take whenever you get hit. The attack patterns and numbers of enemies will still remain the same no matter what level of difficulty you're playing on. Plus, the enemies don't exactly shoot off many missiles, and they're easy to dodge. What makes the game frustrating is whenever you go to attack. The attacks are so broken that whenever you go to defend yourself against a baddie, you'll just end up shooting yourself in the foot. This becomes a major issue when you're fighting the mini-bosses, because you need to destroy them in order to move forward. It's not like they're brilliantly programmed, they don't even move in a zigzag for crying out loud, but when you do go and attack, you're either left open from your distance attack, or the enemy rushes into you when you perform your basic slashing attack. While I found that if you save your Volt Tekka attack for the mini-bosses, while it doesn't get rid of them, it does take out a large chunk of their health and it'll even the odds. Once you manage to defeat the mini-boss, the game switches over to the second stage of gameplay, which is a one-on-one fight. Now, I played a lot of fighting games before, so I feel as though I can say this, but Tekkaman Blade has the worst fighting game engine I've ever come across in a video game. I guess I'll start up with the horrifically clunky controls. In this section of the game, you have the movement with the D-pad, of course, and you have two attacks, a stab and a swipe. Both of these moves, by the way, have the same amount of range and damage to them. There are no combos, no special moves, just these two attacks. You just stab and swipe, and on the rare occasion where the AI decides to attack, block, which is done by pressing the D-pad in the opposite direction you're facing. There's nothing in this combat system that makes the combat interesting or fun. Where the game does try to mix it up a little bit in the combat is when it comes to the weapons. If you hit your opponent 3 times in a row with the same move, they'll lose their weapon and their will to live, because once you disarm them, they become completely useless in a fight. The main strategy in the fighting sections is to disarm them and beat the crap out of them. While the different characters you'll be facing throughout the game have different weapons and different ranges of moves, the moment that you disarm them, they're only left with the basic punch and kick moves, which is the same amongst each and every character. You can disarm them within the first 5 seconds of the battle, so you're left with a glimpse of just how each character works before you pummel them into the grave. Although keep in mind that you can be disarmed as well, but it doesn't make that much of a difference in the long run, because while you'll only be left with a punch and kick attack, they do the same amount of damage as a stab and swipe, and the kick actually has a slightly better reach than the swipe, which can lead to some silly moments, because if both of you are disarmed, you'll be trying to kick each other to death. While the fighting mechanics themselves are screwed up to all living hell, the way the matches are set up are even worse. First off, it's not your standard best 2 out of 3 match. It's how many lives you have left over from the side-scrolling section to just knocking them out once. You can change this in the options menu, but really you don't want to be stuck in these sections of the game for too long. While that does give the player an advantage over the computer, it makes the whole experience of the fighting levels feel a bit rushed. While we're on the topic of feeling rushed, the fights are timed for 30 seconds, which is really short for a fighting game, and yes, you can turn them off in the options menu, but if you leave the timer on, it can majorly screw you over. You see, if you happen to be in a fight that goes on for a bit longer than 30 seconds, which is very likely to happen, the computer will decide that you just straight up lost the round. No matter where your health bar was at, it will say that you lost altogether. You can be at full health and the enemy at 1% left, and the computer will just say that you lost. What makes it worse is that your attacks do so little damage that even when your opponent is disarmed and backed into a corner, it still takes a while for you to dwindle his health down to 0. Of all the characters you have to fight, the one who puts up the most amount of resistance is Tekkaman Axe, and he's on the 3rd level. Honestly, what makes him difficult to deal with is that he has an attack that has a hit radius as large as your character, and it's hard to avoid. While it doesn't do much damage, Tekkaman Axe will spam the attack for as long as he's holding the weapon. Once you disarm him, the attack will stop, but even then, Tekkaman Axe will still put up more of a fight than the others. The last stage of the game is a side-scrolling boss fight with Tekkaman Omega, and like everything else in this game, he's really easy even though you can take a lot of damage from his character. Tekkaman Omega has 3 attacks: his tail, his spear, and his chest. Take out the tail with a Volt Tekka, shoot the hand that's holding the spear, and slash the living hell out of the face on the chest once the laser beam disappears, and you'll beat this pushover in no time at all. At the end of the game, you'll be treated to a little epilogue about how you saved humanity, and it'll give you a final high score. So that's Tekkaman Blade for the Super Nintendo. Ultimately, it's a game that makes you its worst enemy. While the fighting sections of the game are awful and the attacking mechanics are flawed for the side-scrolling sections, the game's still playable. It can be beaten in about 30 minutes or so, but it can be a bit of a fun challenge on the higher difficulties. If you want a good game with Tekkaman Blade though, check out Super Robot Wars W. That's all for Hitch Plays this time. This is Hitch, signing out.